We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And thus, no state, no man-made institution, no government official, no human person can give us these rights. But God himself has endowed us with these gifts. And those rights are inalienable. That is, those rights are inviolable and cannot be taken away from us, lest those who try usurp and take upon themselves the place and the prerogative that belongs to God alone. And so it's right and good for us to have a day each year when we especially remember those rights, and that God is the source of those gifts of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we should count it a supreme blessing to live in a country that professes that truth, that God is the source of those rights. And if God is the source of those rights, then we begin to realize the dignity and the inviolability of each human being, right? Because what's the connection here? We start realizing the dignity and inviolability of each human being is because that's how God has truly made us. And so each and every one of us, made in the image and likeness of God, by our very nature, each of us have a nobility, a freedom, and a sacredness that should never be trampled upon. In other words, our God-given goodness is inherent to us, and it's not some add-on or some social construct so that we can all get along better. It's truly who we are, and thus the reverence and love that is due to us as human beings. Because of our intrinsic dignity as human persons, we are supposed to treat one another. That love then becomes the only real response. John Paul calls it the personalistic norm, that love is the only real response that is afforded to every human being, right? And love being willing the good of the other because of that person's sacredness. But the minute we take God out of the picture, that's when our sense of reverence and love for each other begins to break down. Because then now our dignity and inviolability is not recognized as innate. It's when God is taken out of the picture that people begin to think that the source of those rights are from some man-made construct or man-made institution like the state, and thus erroneously assume that then, because it's the state that gives it to us, that the state has the right to take them away. And we've seen throughout history the catastrophic and horrific consequences of when the state assumes that the role that only God has. Whenever and wherever the state demands allegiance above, in place of, or at the exclusion of God, death reigns. We see that throughout history. And so I hope that we all recognize just how significant that belief of God is, that we are a nation truly under God. And what a blessing it is to have it enshrined at the founding of our country, a blessing that is rare among the nations of the world. But because much of our nation in these last decades have strayed from the belief in God, we unfortunately see that mentality that these rights aren't inalienable taking root in the psyche of many Americans. And so that's why we treat each other like dirt instead of human persons. And so the church's work of evangelization is all the more imperative, so that in recognizing the dignity of every human person, we may restore that prerequisite civility that's needed for human progress and the freedom to be able to announce the good news that God has for his people.